Hey y'all, Happy New Year. Welcome back to the Kirkpatrick Podcast. It is Vanessa, and I am so excited to be here with you all in 2026, the beginning of season 5, and really starting by getting back to the basics when it comes to Kirkpatrick and measurement and kind of where we are. I saw this morning a LinkedIn post from a colleague that said, that they really felt like 2026 was going to be a year of disruption for the learning industry and our space. And I have to say, I agree. There's so many people that are now talking about measurements and evaluation and, than like ever before. Yeah, it was always a topic of conversation before, but just not, I think, to the level to how we see it now. So I want to talk about something that relates to that. And it's something that's kind of been like bugging me in the back of my mind. And I think that we have this false assumption that we're not measuring. But I actually think that we've been measuring now more than ever before. Now, are we always measuring the right things? No. But we do have a lot of data at our fingertips. It feels like every new platform that we purchase or procure, we're being told about the dashboards and the analytics that we can see on the back end, right? We're being fed more key performance indicators from leaders or our managers or from HR that are on our performance plans. There's more surveys than we've probably seen, and things that maybe look like surveys that don't look like surveys that are actually surveys. That's what I meant to say. There's always some new report that's coming out, but yet what I realize is we're still not getting to the actual question that needs to be answered, and it's, do you actually understand performance better? What makes someone perform? And the truth is, I think the answer is no for most of us, right? Like we actually, just because we have more analytics to say, this is what folks are engaging with, or, they're not engaging with that, or this is what, the test score that they got, or how many hours they completed, we're still not seeing performance actually improve or if we do see a performance improvement, we're still not able to say what caused that. And I actually think with the amount of data that is out there, we're actually seeing leaders feel less confident, not more confident, if that makes sense. So they know that they have a lot of information and it feels like it's scattered everywhere, even if you are an organization that's like kings and queens of Power BI, but they're still unsure about where performance is breaking down, whether people are actually ready, right? How ready are they to perform? What is that we need them to perform? Or what decisions we have to make next as an organization, right? Like, where do we go from here? I think that's actually why a lot of us executives, I'll put myself in that category, we gravitate towards tools like, AI and like ChatGPT and Gemini and all of these things, especially when they came out, because it helped us be another thought partner about like what to do next. And actually, now that I'm thinking of this, I'm about to go on a side tangent. I actually also think part of the reason is because it's a private thought partner. So it's something that I can go back and forth and ask what maybe seems like a silly question. And I have the comfort and safety of asking that in like a private sort of setting. So I think that's also probably why we gravitate towards those sorts of tools. But anyway, so I want to really discuss today, if we are measuring more than ever before, why haven't we seen performance improve? And I think that the first piece of that is this assumption that we rarely even question. And it's assuming that we even are gathering the right data, right? Or gathering the right data. The fact is, we're missing all of the right data, and we're focusing so much on these activity measures or these vanity metrics, and we just never actually refine what it is, or really not even refine, like we really deep dive and look at seriously the data that we're looking at or that we're asking for and what it's going to do for us. We may redesign a dashboard. We may speed up a report, especially nowadays, right? Running through like a chat GPT or Copilot to help you create the report. And we assume that clarity is going to follow from there, but the clarity that comes out of it isn't actually still the clarity that we need. And so, I can tell you in my own experience, we have a lot of data at KP, a lot. And I came in, to the organization and saw a lot of the data that we had. But but I didn't have the right things to know, were the certifications working? Were the certifications giving folks and participants the outcomes that they were looking for? What were they doing with the certification post, achievement? There wasn't a ton of those touch points, and no, sort of shade or anything like that to the Kirkpatricks for that. I mean, I think that they had the data that they were able to collect, and we deal with a lot of the same challenges that you all do. Access to participants, being able to engage them continuously when you don't own say that, and I hate saying that, when you don't have the ability to really connect with them in the same way because we're not from or at the same organization. And I could tell you, as someone that was around a lot of information, had a ton of data in front of me, I didn't have confidence as to what was actually happening, why that was happening, and what we should do next with what I had. And so I stalled, and I actually made the wrong decision. I think also, to be clear, going back to my whole, I'm kind of a woo-woo type person. I believe that I made the decision that I made because it was the right decision at the time. And I do not think I would have led to where we are going today and in the future had I made those decisions. So I'm okay with failure, a very expensive failure. But I think that everything happens in divine timing, and this was the right timing for us. Okay. So, I found myself, talking to Jordan or Tiffany and our facilitators and our affiliates and asking them more and more about what they're seeing, what their experience has been in their, connection with customers, and then asking customers, anytime I was out or seeing them, asking them more about, what they're doing and doing so many touch bases and catch-up meetings with past customers and reaching out to past customers that I had never even met to find out more what was happening, because even though I had all of this data, I didn't have the right one to make the right decision. And it stalled, I think, our progress. And it made me have to go in and do the real hard work that it takes to actually know whether or not something is having impact, and to know what to do next and how to grow and scale and evolve next. I would not have known that we needed to create these enterprise solutions and really dive into technology and really dive into, our new centers of excellence and things like that if I didn't take the time to really stop and listen. And it's time consuming. It took me, over a year, do all of this work and and then to sit down and figure out what these pieces meant. But you have to do that work. And so when you think about your leaders and you're thinking about, they're not doing anything differently, or we're always doing the same thing, it's probably because the data that they're being fed is not the data that's helping them to lead. The data that we're providing them is not giving them enough of anything to tell them what direction they need to be moving in, and what's working and what's not, what's actually helping someone improve. If we're not, so this is like a wild thing, right? We know that more content does not equal performance, but the only data we give our leaders is completion rates and content related metrics. So they're going to just say, okay, we'll keep doing what you're doing. Everyone's getting 100, on the test. Seems like it's working, but we all know it's actually not. So, but they still don't know that. They still can't see that. They can't see that what's actually helping someone out in the field is that job aid that we created that accompanies the course. The fact that they have, an app on their phone to when they're in the warehouse, they put it up to, a pallet and it tells them more about the product, right? We don't have that sort of information. So what do? We repeat the same things over and over and over again. We make the decisions, the best decisions that we know how to make with the data that we have in front of us. So, it takes us to kind of where we are today. All of our measurement that we have and all of the data that we have will tell us about the activity. It's going to tell us what happened, right? It's going to tell us how much happened. It's going to tell us when it happened. But it's not going to tell us what happened because they participated in that event, in that experience. And it doesn't do anything to explain performance. Performance is so much bigger than one single event, initiative, or activity. And we're just not hitting the mark, and it shows, and it's put us in a position over the last 2, almost 3 years where there's, the jig is up. Is that the right saying? Jig? The jig is up. It's time for us to say what's working, what's not. It's time for us to say we're ripe for disruption. So many other sectors and sectors and like business units, they all have had, disruption. Marketing had one. We're kind of ripe and next for it, but it's exciting. And I think it's something that we shouldn't look at as upsetting. I think there's only positive places to go from here. And the best growth happens from those uncomfortable places. And the best growth happens when you can truly sit with yourself and say, and be real with yourself and say, what we're doing is not working. And I've got to take the lead and stop the madness, right? And stop the cycle, if you will, right? Of taking on more content, taking on more orders. At some point, we just have to say stop. No one's going to come and look at us and say, you know what, we're not going to give you another order. We're not going to request training because you guys, we know it's not working. And you guys need to, do what you do. No, you have to we have to show up the way we want to be seen. And that's what I encourage you from this episode is take a moment to stop and look at and say, what are we doing that is not actually aiding us to be where we want to be? When I look at that own reflection that we did at Kirkpatrick, I thought, where do we want to go? What about us is hindering where we are going? What about what we're putting out there is not giving folks what they need and not walking the walk are not going to actually help us to get us to this really big, audacious goal that I have for us. And that meant a lot of reflection, a lot of me being very uncomfortable. Look, like I can come up with a certification program like with the best of them, talk about creating a great learning experience or like wanting to put a learning experience together. Like I can do that in my sleep. And I will do that now way too quickly. Just like the other day, I was in the middle of writing 3 new certifications for Kirkpatrick. That's my comfort zone. The other things, the technology, the enterprise solutions, the centers of excellence, right? All of those big solutions that will help organizations actually scale measurement and evaluation, that's challenging. I had to take that look for myself. I also had to make a real big move. One of the things they say when it comes to, growing a business is, finding your niche and really like dominating that category. Kirkpatrick model is so well known out there. It's the model for learning and development when it comes to measurement. That's just the fact. And yet, instead of being this like big fish, right, in this little pond, I said, hey guys, let's move the model and move it into more of this enterprise model, something where we're going to go into new sectors. We're going to go talk to new people that don't even know what Kirkpatrick model even is, like starting back at the very beginning to where we've got to educate people and get them to understand why measurement is important and like what our, authority is in this space. And we're just going to kind of start from the beginning and try to be and work our way to becoming a big name again in a completely different category. So this is definitely off of a tangent. So on a different tangent, but now I've got to also just say this. If you watched my episode many moons ago, probably it was last season for sure, probably at the beginning of the year, I was talking about like the Beyonce Cowboy Carter tour, and why I think that was a flop as opposed to her other tours. I think that it reminds me of a reflection that I made in that episode of like Taylor Swift and how she went from being a country singer into then going into the next genre and using into like the bigger genre, right? Like more like top 40, like pop sort of music, and why that worked so well as opposed to when you kind of start that big and go into this other niche, it didn't work as well. No shade on her musicality and all of that. Just a difference. I kind of think of that. I see a lot of similarities in what we're doing here at KP with that sort of thing where we started like, country music, if you will, was like our niche. And now we're kind of broadening out from there. And so I think, we'll see how that goes, but there's no way. So let me circle it back around. Sorry, y'all. Thank you for coming along on my tangent. Welcome to what it's like being in my brain. In the middle of saying things and talking about things, I start thinking about other things and different ideas come up. If you don't want to be in my brain, I'm sorry. But anyway, I think that like making that stand for ourselves is something that we had to stop and say. We had to reflect and do and say, no one was going to come in and like give us a path to this new category and like say like, here, give us these other things. We had to do the uncomfortable thing of stepping out of our comfort zone and saying, we need to look at something else because this is not working. And I think we all have to do that as well. And so I want you to collect more data. I wanted to make sure I said this right. I want you to collect more data, but I want you to collect it in the right way. And I want you to collect the right data. And I want you to look at the data that you have in front of you and really say, do I even need this? Is it helping? Is it explaining what I need to explain? And if it's not, that's not the data to feed your leaders. So your reports might get longer, your metrics might multiply, your dashboards might get more sophisticated as you start to ask additional questions. But I want you to really think about, do you need all of this data to tell the right story? And know that you don't have a data problem. What you have is a sense-making problem. I can't make sense of what it is that I'm seeing in front of me. I think when I think of how did we get here, I think we looked at evaluation as simply a reporting measure as opposed to evaluation is a tool that an organization can learn from. And it's vital and is the foundation to all of these other things that we're trying to do. And if we don't do the right evaluation, if we don't do the right measurements, then we're not going to be able to actually grow and scale properly. And we're going to be paralyzed by the data that we have in front of us. And I actually think that this only accelerates, as we get things like, more AI tools and things like that in your organization. Like data is only going to get a little bit messier. We're only going to get more of it. So we've got to get really good at making sense of it. And so we've got to stop focusing on activity metrics and focus on how are we documenting the effort that went in? How are we summarizing what the outcomes were? How are we proving that something actually occurred because they took part in an intervention, right? And it's not about A to B causality. It's about there is a whole ecosystem of tools and things that influence whether or not performance occurred. And one of those pieces was this activity, was this intervention. And it contributed this much of a percentage towards that impact, whether it's productivity gains, financial return, whether it's lives saved, right? You have to stop looking at the learning function as just a single activity and a single thing. It's part of an entire ecosystem. When you think about evaluation, like the original intent of it was never just to show that activity happened. It was to help leaders understand what's working, what wasn't, and why. I mean, that's why Don was looking for ways to evaluate, right, his own supervisor program. He wanted to know what's even happening. How are people taking this, what I take them through, what I teach them, and applying it to the real world context, and what impact is that having on the organization? It wasn't to sit here and say this many people went through the program and this is the score that they received. So I want you to think about how evaluation shows up in your organization. If we're just talking about evaluation as reporting instead of learning, it loses its entire ability to support performance. So if measuring more has an improved performance, the question isn't how much we're measuring. It's what do we believe measurement is supposed to do? And that's where we're going to keep going next. And if this podcast raised more questions for you than answers, I'm glad. That was very intentional. Come back for more. Because honestly, clarity doesn't come from more data. It comes from better thinking about what that data is for. And that's what we're going to be taking you on for this entire season and series, is really thinking about the questions and really helping to make sense of the data that we have around us and how we can use it to power performance. With that, friends, I will catch you all next week on the podcast. Talk soon. Bye.